Welcome to another edition of the ADP show, brought to you by all of us over at DynastyLeagueFootball.com. It's me, Dan Myler, with Ryan McDowell once again. Ryan, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back at it. We've had vacations and road trips and SFB. We've had a lot of things throwing off our schedule, but we are here and ready to talk some ADP.
Yeah, so much we could talk about, including those Scott Fish Bowl drafts, but we'll save that for other podcasts and other shows that you might find on the internet. Instead, here today, once again, we're going to talk about the average draft position that you collect over at DynastyLeagueFootball.com. The latest ADP is out over at DLF. All that content can be found over at DynastyLeagueFootball.com. But instead of really focusing on all the players as a whole, Ryan, we thought this week we'd talk about the running backs, which is really the position that's on a lot of dynasty owners' minds as we get out of all these rookie drafts and we're talking about these startups and really even trade value moving through the offseason and getting ready for 2020.
Yeah, the running back position, just over the past couple of years with the infusion of talent, it has just become the it position in Dynasty. We saw the wide receiver spot kind of hold that down for a few years, and it's transitioned back to running back, and I'm sure we'll see it switch back over the next few years. But it really is an interesting position to look at up and down the ranks, because not only do you have those top guys that are holding down the top overall in Dynasty ADP, but this rookie class of 20 is really shaking up the running back rankings as well as running back ADP.
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of those rookies as we move along, but let's start at the top. This, of course, is July ADP is what we're talking about, the most recent ADP over at DLF, and it kicks off right at the top. Ryan, I got to know from you, there's some dynasty owners that think there's three running backs at the top with McCaffrey and Barkley and Zeke. Some think it's down to two guys with just McCaffrey and Saquon. And there's others probably out there that say, no, it's all McCaffrey because of that huge 2019 season. Tell me about this group at the top. If you were to tier these guys, how many make that top tier if you're in a startup right now?
For me, it's a top tier of two. And honestly, I would go as far as saying if I'm doing a startup draft and I don't have a top two pick, I don't even want to be in the first round. I'm trying to trade out of the first round or at least trade down and pick up some other assets, some future rookie picks, something, because I don't see a ton of difference between the third overall player and the 10th or 12th or 15th overall player. But of course, those top two running backs that we're talking about, Christian McCaffrey at the top, he is the RB1 once again and the 101 overall. I did think it was interesting this month, his ADP is 1.0. That's it. That means he went first overall in every single draft. That's not normal for our mock draft data. Usually we'll see Barkley sneak in with at least one first overall draft position, but that didn't happen. So we've got Barkley 1.0 ADP, and we've got Saquon Barkley coming in as the RB2, the second overall player, and a 2.0 ADP. He was the second player drafted in all six of our Dynasty startup mock drafts.
After that, Ryan, it gets a little bit shaky. Zeke comes in at 3 in most of these mock drafts, most of the live drafts that you see as well. But there's a group of running backs that are awfully intriguing that all fall in the first round. Of course, after McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, you have Zeke at 3, and then Dalvin Cook at 4, Alvin Kamara at 5, Joe Mixon at 6, and Miles Sanders at 7. They all fall in that top 12 in overall ADP, Ryan. But our top 7 running backs, pretty exciting players, varying levels of excitement with each one of them, but all certainly give dynasty owners that upside that we all crave.
Yeah, absolutely. You can expect the immediate production from all of them. Ezekiel Elliott is kind of locked himself into that third spot, and as you said, some would argue he's even in the top tier with McCaffrey and Barkley. He's not for me. I see him as a player who's going to start losing some value in the coming year or so. So I would have a real hard time taking him third overall, even with the production that we expect from him in the short term. I was really surprised this month to see Dalvin Cook move back up into that fourth spot. Of course, we've had the holdout scare that didn't seem to last long. Of course, there's uncertainty. Obviously, if there's even going to be a season, so we'll see what happens. The new CBA that was signed a few months ago also makes it almost impossible for players to even hold out. So I think the smart dynasty player, fantasy player, when they hear that holdout threat from Cook, they just kind of roll their eyes and they know he doesn't really have very much leverage. So he was the RB5 last month, in part based on that threat, but now he's back to RB4, flip-flopping spots with Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kamara there at 5. He, along with Miles Sanders, and even as you get early into the second round of these startup drafts, Ryan, you include guys like Nick Chubb, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Josh Jacobs. There's upside. We could even extend beyond that with Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, and the list goes on and on. There's upside. These guys are dripping with upside. These rookies like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor, second-year backs like Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders. High expectations, guys. We're all really building our franchises around moving forward because there's so much value early with these running backs in startups and so much value later on with the wide receivers. It seems like that's the philosophy that lots of savvy dynasty owners are taking in these startups right now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of become the common strategy. The chalk strategy is running back in the first and second round, and then you can look at the wide receiver position. I do think it's interesting. You talk about these second round running backs. You mentioned a lot of them: Chubb, Jacobs, Derrick Henry. Those guys are in the second round in part because they don't offer much upside when it comes to catching the ball out of the backfield. All three of those are limited either by their own skills or by their offense. But we don't expect them to really be much of a threat in that receiving game. And, it remains to be seen whether Jonathan Taylor, who's in that same range, if he becomes another running back in that same mold of a good, strong, powerful runner, but not someone who's going to catch the ball. Of course, that was one of the concerns about him as he comes into the league. And you also talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, RB9. He's not in that mold. We know he's going to catch the ball and catch it a ton. So, personally for me, if I'm drafting, I'm taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire over all of those players who I don't expect to catch the ball. And I would flip-flop he and Nick Chubb in my own rankings.
Yeah, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is one of those guys that all of us as dynasty owners are trying to build around. He's pretty expensive as a rookie, of course. There aren't a lot of guys that threaten being in the top 12, even the top 15, Ryan, as rookies. But Clyde has kind of pushed his name into that group. Guys like Saquon Barkley before him, of course, Ezekiel Elliott have pushed into the first round before they even stepped on an NFL football field. And Clyde is on the verge of doing that as well. Jonathan Taylor, of course, right behind him as well. Once we get into these running back twos, Ryan, after Derrick Henry, who was the last that we mentioned there, it starts off with another rookie, really, J.K. Dobbins at 24 overall. Then some veterans, Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones, Kenyon Drake is a sneaky name for a lot of dynasty owners, guy that has hung around on rosters but really wasn't all that productive until 2019. And then we get back into the young guys with DeAndre Swift and Cam Akers.
Yeah, most of these guys making up the third round, most of the players that you just mentioned. And it's just another reminder how deep the running back position is right now. And in part, that's at least do a little bit to the rookies. We've talked about them a lot tonight. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Taylor, Dobbins, Swift, and Akers. That's 5 running backs out of the top 20 are rookies. So a lot kind of sitting on their shoulders when it comes to the dynasty landscape at the running back position. But if you were one of those players who didn't go running back with your first 2 picks, you look at this and think maybe you can grab one of those rookies, or maybe even Austin Eckler in the 3rd round, and you still get hopefully quite a bit of production. So I think that the depth of the position just really opens up some different strategies as you're team building.
So talk to me about a couple of as you said, we've talked a lot about these rookies, and even in past episodes, we've focused on a lot of rookies. Talk to me about some of these veteran options that you see throughout the list, maybe beyond McCaffrey and Barkley and Zeke and even Kamara and Mixon. Once you get into that 2nd and 3rd round, guys like Derrick Henry, he's not that pass catcher. Austin Eckler, however, is. Aaron Jones has been around for a while, has that RB3 overall type season already under his belt. And then Kenyon Drake. And if we dig even deeper, guys like Leonard Fournette and Todd Gurley. If you're looking for some value, you're looking to dig a little bit deeper to find your running back 1 after investing highly in wide receivers or maybe even quarterbacks in superflex leagues, Ryan, who are the guys that stick out to you among this veteran group?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of landmines there. Look at Kenyon Drake, and it feels like he's one of the most overvalued, overrated players in Dynasty right now. We saw how he ended the season with the Cardinals. And I think there's maybe some misconceptions or just some misremembering. He, of course, had 1 or 2 really big games for Arizona last year after the trade, but he also had some duds mixed in there. And even with that new contract, even with David Johnson gone, he's not a player that I'm looking at and just assuming that he's going to be a top running back for the next 2, 3, 4 years. I mentioned the other day on Twitter, he's actually older than Todd Gurley, which came as a big surprise to a lot of people. Of course, we think about Gurley as a player that's been around a while. Kenyon Drake, because he sat on the bench in Miami for a couple of years, he feels more like a kind of a fresh name in the dynasty space. And that's just not the case. So he would certainly be a player I would be avoiding. Aaron Jones, his value has fallen off a little bit since the NFL draft. I think I would be taking advantage of that. They have very similar ADPs, and I would easily prefer Jones of those 2 players.
Yeah, the guy that sticks out to me, Ryan, is probably Austin Eckler. Of course, the investment that the Chargers made in Eckler, it seems like more of although it was reported as a 4-year contract, seems like he has a pretty much guaranteed 2 years of being a guy that they're going to rely on. And with the production he's had over the last couple of seasons, it feels like, especially if you're a contender, a guy that's trying to win right now, if you can get Austin Eckler on your roster, that doesn't seem like a bad investment. Maybe not necessarily early in the 3rd round of a startup, because you don't know how the rest of your draft is going to play out. But if you're targeting trade targets out there and trying to get that guy that you can depend on, Eckler seems to have high immediate upside.
Yeah, I totally agree. Austin Eckler would definitely be a player I would be targeting. One player I think dynasty managers need to make a decision on is Leonard Fournette. And of course, we've seen his value fall off quite a bit. He's still on this list. He's the RB19 right now. And coming in as an early 4th rounder, even with the discount, I'm not pulling the trigger on him there. But he's a player I think if you're in an existing league, his trade value is going to be much lower than what this ADP might suggest. So he's a player that you could almost certainly get for a future 1st round rookie pick if you want to go that way, or maybe find a player that's the equivalent of that value. But to draft him in a startup draft at 38 overall, probably not going to make that call.
Yeah, pretty risky for sure. I think that bleeds into the guy that's 20th overall in these running back rankings with Todd Gurley. There's certainly some immediate upside. The opportunity in 2020 in Atlanta is they'll lean heavily on him. But beyond that, lots of question marks with with those aging running backs. And it feels gross kind of, Ryan, to call these guys that have only been in the league 4 or 5 years the aging running backs. But that's really the reality we live in as Dynasty owners. Ryan, we're out of time this week. We want to thank everybody that watched this episode of the ADP show, brought to you by all of us at dynastyleaguefootball.com. For Ryan, I'm Dan. We'll catch you again next week.